Hey, Mr. Pond,
Here we go.
tell me what to do to make all my Lumber Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Loves the Pond Boss coming at you live from the safe confines of Pond Boss World headquarters right here in North Texas, where we're kind of hunkered down. Last week I wasn't hunkered down. Last week I was rolling out, hanging out with Ron Ardoin. Got it right. We had a big time, and for those of you guys that watched that video, it was a little bit irritating. For some reason, I still haven't figured out, the dadgum video stopped right at 7 o'clock when the feeder went off. I see Jason Nepstad. Hey, Trent Cox, good to see you, my friend. Holy cow, Trent's my trainer. He gets to work me out a couple days a week, and he's going to get to hang out tonight and see how this show goes. There's Clark Cole checking in from Weatherford, Jason Nepstad from North Carolina. So what I thought I'd talk about tonight is start off with a topic that hit the Pond Boss Forum earlier this week. Frank James, who comes on this video broadcast pretty often, asked a question. He's got a little trepidation about stocking threadfin shad and tilapia in his pond because he's a little bit worried about what they're going to do to the primary productivity of the water. There's Ron Ardoin. Good to see you, Ron Ardoin. Well, I had so much fun hanging out with Ron and his wife and his son. We ate some outstanding Cajun food. Oh my gosh. And we drank a little wine and drank a little more wine. There's Mark Dauber from Montgomery, Alabama. Michael Eric from Iowa. We got folks from all over the country. Good to see you guys. So anyway, had a big time. And by the way, last week's video that was cut in half, well, when it went off, I started it over, but I didn't realize I did it on my personal Facebook page. So Leanne went in earlier this week and she got both sides of that, part 1 and part 2, and put them on YouTube, and you can find those. They're linked through the Pond Boss website. There's Frank James. I'm about to talk about you, Frank James. I see Jim Morgan checking in. Robbie Shell. Jim Morgan's from North Carolina. Robbie Shell's from Missouri, Purina Mills, who helped sponsor this show, and I appreciate them. Todd Austin's checking in. So you know how I like to do it. I like to look on my laptop. In the meantime, if you guys will do me a favor, click like, share this video to your timeline, and put hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments. You're eligible for a drawing for a hat and for a mug. Now, we ran out of those mugs that keep hot things hot and cold things cold, so Leanne's going to have to order some. But in the meantime, I got some coffee mugs. So that's pretty good. Look at there. There's Josie and Wayne. They're hanging out. Got their regular Wednesday afternoon date watching the Pond Boss talk about fish. I still think that's great. I love it. There's Danny Mack. Good to see Danny Mack checking in from Austin. Hope you guys are kind of hunkered down. This has really been an interesting span of time. I mean, I don't know how you guys are doing it, but I kind of got a feeling that you're hanging out and sheltering in place. I am sheltering in place, but last week I sheltered in place in my truck, and then Friday or Saturday I'm going to shelter in place in my truck. I got a fellow that wants to go spend about an hour looking at a pond down near Austin, Texas, east of Austin. So I'm going to drive down there, stay 6 feet away from him outside, and we're going to talk about his pond. So I'm pretty excited about that. So now I'm going to see if I can find this on my laptop so I can see what all is going on. Here it comes. Oh, I can see it now. Gary Hempel, good to see Gary. Lisa Ann, good to see her. Danny Mack, Clark Cole, Mark Fornash. Carrie Cooper Woods checking in. Went to school with Carrie. Jim Liner, they call him Elmo on here. Let's see who else. I can't see everybody else. Yeah, Frank, it helps to shelter in place of pond. I love that. You know, it's I don't know what you guys are doing, but I hope you're staying safe. These are some weird times that we're in, you know. I don't need to tell you that. You already know. But we've got, Debbie and I have 10 grandchildren with 2 more on the way. One's going to be born in about 10 days, and we're not going to be able to be there when that baby's born, which that's not fun, but by gosh, that's the way it is. But we've got 2 of them with us. We've got an 11-year-old and 15-year-old because their parents work in hospitals. My daughter Lindsay works at Baylor Hospital in Dallas. She's a director of nursing, so she's not on the floor with patients, but she's administratively managing nurses over 6 surgical units. And you can imagine how busy she is. And then the kid's dad works in the hospital in Sherman. So we thought it would be smart to bring them to our house. And I can't tell you how I am enjoying and feeling fulfilled and joyful and peaceful to be hanging out with those kids. Debbie bought a paddle boat for herself for her birthday, claimed it's from me, and I guess since I paid for half of it, it is. She paid the other half. But those kids, they don't ever talk at home, but yesterday afternoon, they're in the middle of the pond beside the house. We got about a 3/4 acre pond right beside the house there at LL, 2, and they were sitting in that paddle boat and talking to each other and pulling songs up on their phones and singing those songs together. They never do that. It kind of makes you feel pretty good. Let me see who else we got. I know I missed a couple of guys, and I don't mean to do that. I see Mike Cottrell, Gary Hempel, good to see you. So let's see, let me scroll down and see some comments. Frank James, I want to address a topic that you put up on the Pond Boss forum, so I do want to talk about that. John Funk, hi there, Mid-Michigan. Does one need to add more golden shiners every 2 or 3 years? Only if they get eaten out, and that's not likely. If you've got golden shiners and they make it, they're going to reproduce. And as long as you've got an ongoing population of 2-year-old golden shiners reproducing, you don't need to stock more. However, golden shiners have an innate, inherent ovarian parasite that reduces the number of eggs they can lay in subsequent years. So a 3 or 4-year-old golden shiner is not going to be a real effective fish to reproduce, to give you babies that you need to keep your fishery going. So if you think that your predator fish are wiping them out, stock more. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. There's Debbie Dobbs Lust. Honey, I was just telling everybody about the pedal boat, I guess you can call it. And Debbie's loving it. Kids are loving it. Kelly Duffy's there. I see Kelly Harrison Davis checking in from Georgia. Chico, good to see Chico. Chico's hanging tough down there in Seguin, Texas. Good to see him. Robbie Shell, Bob, no need for fishing license in Missouri the next 2 weeks. Time to social distance and go be. I love that. I didn't even know they suspended fishing licenses. So go to the lake and go fishing. I love that. Yes, Carrie Cooper Wood. Carrie says, thanks to Lindsay and her husband for their service. Yeah, I tell you, it's a stressful time for everybody right now. I'm thankful that Lindsay's not in contact with patients. But what's stressful for Lindsay is working with those soldiers on the front lines, because she's in communication with them all day long, every day. And it's a lot of planning, and there's a fair amount of fear, because who knows what's going to happen. I mean, I've seen all the charts. I've seen all you guys have too. I'm sure you've been watching that. So it's kind of strange time. There's Chris Aguilar, Connie Bingaman, Fred Bingaman watching. Josie, good job, Debbie. Yeah, Josie, you and Debbie really need to meet. There's Jason Luster. I got to talk to Jason Luster today. One of the things I talked to Jason Luster about, the main thing, was stocking freshwater shrimp as an additional forage fish in private fishing lakes. I got a call from Craig Upstrom yesterday with Aquaculture of Texas. He is the only guy that I know that produces post-larval freshwater shrimp prawns, and he's located just west of Fort Worth. And he and I were talking, and I thought I'd write an article for Pond Boss. So I called Jason and visited with Jason. And Jason is Luster's Fish and Wildlife. Check him out. Look him up. He's a really passionate guy. He does fish and wildlife. He's a deer guy as well as a fish guy. I think he leans a little bit more toward fish. Seems to me like, anyway. But we talked about, he's got several clients that stock little 3/8 inch to 1/2 inch long Macrobrachium rosenbergi, which is freshwater prawns that are native to Australia. And so he stocks, with his better clients, he stocks 1,000 per acre every month once the water temperature hits 70 degrees. And he says in the fall, he's got clients that call him, and they'll send him pictures or tell him about bass that they've caught that have these 10, 12 inch long shrimp hanging out of their mouths. Well, my common sense tells me your survival rates won't be very high unless you've got outstanding habitat for shrimp, which is aquatic plants and some shallow water where they can be. And they're kind of clear, so I don't know that birds can get them as easily as they can get crawfish. But we talked about that. Jim Liner said he's getting ready to stock more tilapia next week. Good timing on that. I see Chris Ford. One of my kids grew up with Chris. As a matter of fact, several of my kids grew up with Chris. Lisa Ann, she got a lot of snappers in their pond. What's the best way to get them out and keep them out? We live on the river, so I doubt there's any way to stop them from setting up camp in the pond. Well, I'm going to tell you this. Listen up. If a turtle eats the fish deserved it. The thing about snappers, though, is they're pretty solitary. If If you've got a pond and you got more than 2 snapping turtles, that's not very many. And they do fish, and they will catch fish and eat them, because that's what snappers do. They catch fish, but they're not going to decimate a healthy population of fish. So I wouldn't worry about it. If you want to try to catch some and give them back to the river, that's cool. Let's see here. Chad Gillespie's watching with Logan. Hey, Logan. Dude, glad you're checking in. You love to go fishing, do you? Yeah, I love that. So do I. It's fun, man. I hope you like to catch big bluegills. And Granddad's going to help you catch the big bluegills if you hadn't done that yet. So, all right, I'm going to circle back to the first topic real quick. Frank James on the forum had a little bit of trepidation about stocking threadfin shad with tilapia, because his worries were that tilapia are primarily filter feeders, but they're going to graze on algae, and he's a little bit worried that they're going to deplete the primary productivity of his plankton bloom. And that's not really going to happen, because tilapia are more often grazers, feeding on filamentous algae or on periphyton, or they'll even come to your fish food. But the threadfin shad are true filter feeders. They're going to be swimming around in open water, mouths open as they breathe, bringing water into their mouths, and as they do that, any small particles that are in the water get captured on the gill rakers inside the gills. If you look inside of a fish's mouth, you see these little structures that are bony looking inside the gills. That captures in the shad, that captures stuff and filters it straight down their throat where they swallow it, and that's part of their nutrition. So, yeah, Frank says, what about the compatibility of threadfin shad and tilapia? That's where I'm going. They're highly compatible. They live in different niches. Threadfin shad spend most of their time in open water. They only come to the shore when they're reproducing on grass. So in order to maximize reproductivity of your threadfin shad, you need a substrate for them to spawn on, which would be things like American pondweed, bushy pondweed, cattails, something that's got grass or a substrate under the water. If you don't have any of that, go buy some square bales of hay, break them up into small sections, and float them along the shore. And the shad will come lay their eggs on those chunks of hay, and the eggs will hatch. Tilapia, on the other hand, they're grazers. They live in the upper limnion, the epilimnion, the top layer of water where all the productivity is going on close to the shore. So threadfins may be out 4 feet deep in 15 feet of water, where the tilapia are going to be maybe 6 feet deep and 6 feet of water, or near the shore. So that's the way tilapia works. So they don't really compete. Even though they eat a parallel food chain, they don't eat the same food chain, and they're totally compatible, because tilapia will actually come to the feeder. So when you stock tilapia, they're serving a different purpose. Now, folks, tilapia in some states are illegal. Missouri and Illinois, they're not legal. Where Fred Bingaman is. You guys can't buy tilapia. They're not legal, which is a shame, because they're going to die in the winter anyway. So, in the states that they're legal, they serve 2 purposes. One is to graze on algae and control filamentous algae in an organic way, so that you're not putting chemicals in the water. And secondly, they reproduce like underwater rabbits. So the thing I've seen about tilapia over the years is their reproductive rates are somewhat better than bluegills, which actually enhances the survival rates of baby bluegills. So when you've got baby bluegills in your pond and the bass are eating tilapia and bluegills, you have more bluegills survive to the fall. And then when the winter or fall comes and the water temperatures start to drop, tilapia are sluggish, and the bass go on a pretty good feeding frenzy and eat all the small ones they can, which leaves a bunch of bluegill going into the winter. So your food chain is enhanced. Tilapia will eat algae. Threadfin shad, on the other hand, they fill an open water niche. That's where they live. They're going to be in big schools out in open water as long as you've got fertility. If your visibility is 36 inches or less, you can probably support threadfin shad. If your visibility is 30 inches and less, you can support a good population of threadfin shad. If your visibility is 18 inches, threadfin shad will thrive. And what will happen is they'll reproduce almost exponentially, because the babies start having babies when they're about 90 days old. So you go into the winter with a whole bunch of little shad. Now, tilapia are going to die at 52 degrees. threadfin shad are going to make it to 42 degrees. So Frank, where you are over near Longview, Marshall area, northeast Texas, east Texas, 4 out of 5 winters, they're going to make it through the winter. This winter, those threadfin shad, if you've got them, they made it through the winter. So let's see here. Michael Duchesne, what about otters? Shoot them. Here, shoot them. I got a call from a guy today that's got a 22-acre lake near, not far from Rusk, Texas. And he's managed it his entire time he's had it for trophy bass. And 3 years ago, he was catching 7 to 9-inch bass in the lake's 6th year. He said last year he noticed a few otters out there, but he didn't know anything about them. He said now the biggest fish they're catching weighs about 3 pounds. I asked him if he knows they're otters. He said, yeah, actually I do because I shot one. Well, when you have one otter, you probably have more otters. Now, here's my take on otters. I think in a natural environment, they deserve to be there and they can thrive there and not disrupt the fishery. Like in a river or a big public lake, they're going to feed primarily on fish like shad and carp. Well, if you have shad and carp, we're not talking about otters. You have largemouth bass, you have big bluegills, you have hybrid stripers, you have channel cat, and they're confined in a smaller area than a public lake or a moving river. So while otters do fine and don't disrupt the fishery in the bigger public lakes and running rivers, they can completely devastate your private waters. So I would pay attention to them. When I said shoot them, I kind of meant that. There's laws, follow the laws, but if you can't shoot them, encourage their suicide. I'll tell you that. So here we go. Frank James, we talked about that. Matt Hines, good to see you. Let's see here. Danny Mack's got something going on here. Let me scroll down here. You guys throw me some questions. Harrison Davis, I ate one before I knew tilapia? Oh, tilapia just eat algae. I mean, that's like you and me eating lettuce. I mean, I'm going to eat a cow and cow eats grass, you know? So I'm not too worried about eating tilapia, especially in Frank's pond. If Frank's feeding fish food and he's got some algae and the tilapia are thriving on that, I'd have no qualms about filleting those tilapia and eating those things. I see Chris Ketchum checking in from the Sherman Bells area. Roger B. Peterson, I'm stocking fingerling largemouth bass in Missouri. Other than feeding them at the same time every day, is there a better, different way to feed train them? Oh, Lord, if you're going to try to feed train largemouth bass fingerlings, you're probably not going to do it. If they don't come from the hatchery already feed trained, odds are low that you're going to get them to feed train in your pond. Now, the only way you could do that is if you could confine them in a cage, and that runs some pretty big risks. So my advice there is call your fish hatchery and see if they're bringing you feed-trained largemouth bass. Now, if they're bringing you fingerlings, little bitty ones that are newly feed-trained, overstock them. Instead of stocking 100 per acre, stock 200 per acre. And the reason I'm saying that is about 30% of those are going to be aggressive enough to come find that fish food. So if you're going to be stocking fingerling largemouth bass that have not been feed-trained, don't count on them to become feed-trained. Now here's what you can count on. If you'll feed your fish, especially Aquamax MVP, that's your go-to feed to feed small fish. Bluegills are going to come to that feed, they're going to tear it up, and they're going to love it. By the way, at 6:48, the last 2 weeks, this video is cut off at 7 o'clock, and I don't know why. Facebook says that they don't do it. I've looked through my phone, I've got enough memory, besides we're streaming, so I have no idea. But if it cuts off, I'm going to come, give me just 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll come right back on, and right here on the same Pond Boss Facebook page, it'll just take me a minute to do it. Fair warning in case it goes away. I'm coming back on, and we'll go to 7:30. So anyway, to go back, feed your bluegills. And then I'll tell you what you should do. Ron Ardoin's feeding 4 times a day on his pond, and his bluegill are just wiping that feed out. But here's what else is happening. He's got bass coming up working on the bluegills. So if you would set your feeder to go off 4 times a day, Roger B. Peterson, sir, then odds are higher that you can attract bass to at least come to the feeder, whether or not they learn to eat the fish food. The only way you're going to take bass that are not feed trained and get some fraction of them to learn how to eat fish food is if they see the hubbub going on because they're not going to be social distancing under the water. They're going to be coming to see what's going on. So they're going to flock to that feed. And the thing I like about MVP is some of the pellets are designed to be small and sink slowly through the water column. So they can see fish that are coming up and they can mimic that behavior. You might get a small fraction of them to learn how to eat fish food by that. But you'd have to feed them about 4 times a day with the fish feeder and set that feeder to go off about every hour and a half or 2 hours around 4 times through the day. So start it like at 8 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 12 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and then see what happens. And if you get to be there and watch all 4 of those feedings after a couple of weeks, you can determine how effective that's being, because you can see the fish eat. If it's not effective, cut it back. All right, let's see here. Let's see what else we got going on here. Ben Arnold, a friend of mine, is building a pond. Told me he's placing several kiddie pools full of pea gravel throughout the bottom to serve as beds. Is this a good idea or a waste of time? It's a great idea if they use it. You know, I've seen a lot of spawning beds built. I've seen guys take kiddie pools and fill them up with gravel. Here's my opinion. They need to be in water 2 to 3 feet deep, and they need to be the biggest kiddie pools you can get, because bluegills especially like to spawn in colonies, and a small kiddie pool is not big enough but to have 4 or 5 craters in it for bluegills. But if you get a big kiddie pool that's 7 or 8 feet across, you might be able to get as many as 25 colonies in that. So here's the bottom line answer. If it's placed in shallow water and it's level, yes, they'll use it. Unless they find a place out there in the pond that they like better. Then they might not. But it's a good idea. I'll tell you this, it does no harm, and it could very well work. There's Mike Augustine checking in. Hi, Mike. Mike DeMint checking in. He's hunkered down over in Memphis, Tennessee. Gary Hempel, me too. Feed the bull and the bluegill feed the bass. Yep. Feed the bluegill and bluegill feed the bass. All right, let's go back to, let me go scroll here and make sure I haven't missed anything. We talked about the turtles. Oh, Michael Eric, what's your thoughts on wipers in smaller waters? I like them. I think smaller waters, meaning, I don't know that I would put wipers, which is a hybrid striped bass. I don't know that I would put them in a pond smaller than about 3 acres. 2 acres at the minimum small size. And I'll tell you this, it kind of depends on the layout of the pond. Shallow water that gets hot in the summer, they don't do as well. But if you've got some deeper water, deeper meaning 12 feet to 18 feet deep, where they can get down deeper around the thermocline, 8 or 9 feet under the water, then they're going to be happier. And here's the thing about hybrid striped bass. They don't really like hot water. Small ponds can get hotter than bigger ponds. So a 100-acre lake is a lot more stable temperature-wise than a 4-acre lake that's only 8 feet deep. So the key there is depth and some surface area, but they'll do fine in small waters. I've got a few in a 1/4-acre pond at the house, and they're doing just fine. You just got to pay attention to them. Okay, let's see what else we got going on here. Let me scroll back up and see what I missed here. I kind of want to go back and talk about that. I want to go back and make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I have. Yep. I want to go back and talk about those freshwater shrimp. I think that's kind of an interesting topic. Then I want to circle back and talk more about what Frank James was talking about. Philip Benefield, if tilapia don't die off, is that a problem? I think it is. I do. I like to stock tilapia for a specific purpose, and that is to live 1 year, or not even 1 year, for that season. And they have a job. Their job is to eat algae, which is organic. You don't have to use any herbicides to kill algae, no copper-based herbicides. Tilapia will eat it, convert it to flesh, then they reproduce a bunch, so they're adding to the food chain. But I want them to die, because if they make it like in San Antonio, where Danny Mac lives, I wouldn't tell him to stock tilapia there, because odds are high that they won't die. The water won't get cool enough in the winter to die. And if they don't, then you're going to end up with a whole bunch of 6, 7, and 8 pound tilapia that won't bite a hook, that are now competing for space and competing for food and battling for position with the rest of the fish, and that's counterproductive. So if they won't be dying off, I have a problem with that. I'd rather them die, because you're going to spend $200 per acre where you spend $300 per acre for algicide. So I look at that as the cost of doing business, and I want them to go away. So yeah, I think it's a problem if they don't die. I see Bruce Condello checking in, Mike Rosa, John Krause checking in from Illinois. Boy, we got some heavy hitters, celebrities checking in with us. Good to see you guys. Holy cow, this is fun. Let's see here. Mike Dement's asking, are there any undesirable results in stocking crawfish in a 2¼ acre pond in West Tennessee? No. As a matter of fact, I just wrote an article today that's going to be in the May-June issue of Pond Boss. I'll tell you about crawfish. And any of you guys that are thinking about stocking crawfish, I want you to be picky. Only stock species that are there. So Mike Dement, you're right there on the edge where you can buy some red swamp crawfish coming out of Louisiana and be fine. But you guys in Missouri, don't buy Louisiana crawfish. Find some that are native to Missouri. Call Ozark Catfisheries or somebody like that. I can't think of the guy's name up in north central Missouri that's got a fish farm, Harrison, I think. See if they can get you some crawfish that are native. Because those crawfish, you don't want to bring in a species that can interact and overwhelm the native species. But to answer your question, Mike Dement, the only undesirable results are as if you overstock crawfish, the worst case scenario is they're going to know they're overcrowded and they're going to leave. I tell a story in the article I wrote today about one of my clients who's got a 10-acre lake. He decided he wanted 4,000 pounds of crawfish about 3 or 4 years ago, which is a lot. 400 pounds per acre. So we got them, we stocked them in there, and holy cow, I got a call 4 days later, and about 2 pounds in each bag were dead. 150 bags, that's 300 pounds of dead crawfish out of 4,000 pounds, which is a small percentage, but he said they had to leave because it stunk so bad. Then he said 3 days later, 4 big crawfish had his wife cornered in the garage when she was coming out to get in the car. So when they're crowded, they'll leave. They'll head out. So I would say, Mike Dement, in a 2½ acre pond, if you want to put 100 to 200 pounds of crawfish in there, it's going to feed your bass. The only other downside is if the majority of them don't get eaten, they could burrow later this summer and build chimneys in the yard, which that's a Class B problem. I think the benefits of crawfish in West Memphis outweigh the problems that's associated with it. Let's see, Matt Hines, can you talk about how the moon influences bass behavior? Yeah, sure, you bet. I think that's a great question. For spawning and feeding, for example, enjoy this show every Wednesday. Hey, I do too. I enjoy it too. Thanks. I just wish I could watch it. The moon phases definitely influence bass. I'll tell you something I learned a long time ago. I got to meet Buzz Hartley, who's been gone probably 25 years, from Kingman, Kansas. The things I learned from that guy, who'd been a fish farmer since the late 50s, he's the guy that figured out how to spawn channel catfish in captivity, how to capture the eggs and how to hatch the fry and how to feed the fry. Nobody knew how to feed baby catfish. What do you feed them? You know, there were no feeds back then for baby fish because nobody knew they needed it. You know, and so what Buzz Hartley told me, he says largemouth bass, he said, Bob, the bass are going to spawn in the first full moon after the frogs start to croak. And you know what? Every spring since then, I've listened for that. And as colloquial as that is, I love it because it's true. Because once the temperature of the water hits, 58, 59, the bass are staged. They're ready to go. The male's building a nest. When the temperature hits 62 to 64, there they go, and they're going to spawn in phases of the full moon. So once that full moon passes, the male is now sitting on eggs on a nest, and those eggs may have come from 4 or 5 different females, and each female may have spawned in 4 or 5 different nests, because that's natural selection to keep the gene pool fresh. Well, the next phase of the full moon, they'll go again because not all their eggs, especially if a big female bass, all of her eggs don't mature at the same time. So she'll spawn again in the next phase of the full moon, and in rare occasions, if she's got any eggs left, that's what's rare, she'll spawn again, but by that time the water's getting a little bit too warm, and she absorbs the rest of her eggs, and then starts getting ready to produce eggs for next year. But their behavior, of course, bass are sight feeders. So when we're going through phases of the full moon when fish aren't necessarily spawning, that means that they don't really have specific times that they feed with phases of the moon. They're going to feed when they're hungry. And if they can see 24 hours a day, that gives them a 24-hour window to go feed. Now, there's other influences such as barometric pressure and water temperature and oxygen content, that cause them to behave. But yes, they do behave, especially when it's time to spawn in phases of the moon. Dennis Smith, how many tilapia would you recommend to stock in a 4.5 acre pond? Dennis, I'll tell you this, depending on where you are, well, I'm going to tell you how many I'd stock. I would stock, if you just want to enhance your food chain, I would stock 10 pounds per acre if you want to enhance your bait fish. But if you want to get filaments algae taken out, stock 20 pounds per acre. And depending on how many you actually buy, so 4.5 acres, that's 90 pounds. 90 pounds are going to cost probably $15 a pound with a little bit of freight on top of that. So that's about the cost. And if you buy more than that, the price goes down. So I think the least that I've seen tilapia this year are $12 a pound. Let's see here. Gary Hempel, lots of Plecostomus in the waters down here. Well, you probably don't have a whole lot of algae then. There's some weird fish in your part of the country. There's Dave Terry. Dave Terry is one of our good friends. Works for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He serves on the Texas Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame Committee. He works with the Toyota Texas Bass Classic. He's right there out in the front trenches doing the work. Dave, glad to see you, buddy. Yep. Aguilar says he'll bring some boudin and some crawfish and some gumbo for a price and stock the crawfish. But the problem with Aguilar and Ardoin bringing crawfish is they're going to stop and boil about half of them on the way down, which is pretty good. Mike DeMint, how many pounds per acre? Tilapia, 10 to 20 pounds depending on your mission. If you want to get rid of algae, stock 20 pounds per acre. Let's see here. Ron says, my nephew's doing just fine. Bobby says, hello. Hello to your nephew there, Ron. Chuck Brinkman, loving the warmer weather. Yeah, boy, we've been out in it a bunch. Nathan Barber, hey, we're thinking about adding channel catfish to our pond. Currently have largemouth, bluegill, and crappie. Pond is roughly 5 acres. Good idea? If so, how many? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you my take on that. My take is that on the channel catfish, if you want to stock them and eat them, stock 100 or more per acre. Now, if you're going to stock them and name them, 50 per acre is enough. Now, if you want to stock them and have a lot to eat, you can go up to 500 or 600 per acre. But when they hit 2.5 pounds, you need to start getting them out. Now, here's the thing about stocking catfish in a 5 acre pond. We're going to assume that they're not going to reproduce. That's not always a good assumption. I can give you several lakes. There's one lake in particular near Memphis, Tennessee, where the catfish reproduced like crazy because the guy that built the lake left 3 trees standing up, and they wallowed out underneath the root balls of the trees, of the dead trees under the water, and they spawn every year under 3 trees. So he's got baby catfish all the time. But if you now one thing that guy did though is he set a feeder up in the neck of his pond where he can feed the fish, and when the catfish come up and they're really boiling the water, we can pull a seine, a big net around them, and catch a bunch of them, and then he can go fillet them and eat them. So, to give you an answer, stock 50 if you're going to do it for fun, stock up to 200 per acre if you're going to eat them, up to 500 per acre if you're going to eat a lot of them. Now, here's the caveat. They won't all bite a hook. As they grow up and get bigger, about half of them will bite a hook. So you're going to need to be prepared to figure out how to trap some or seine some as they get bigger, or you're going to have a whole bunch of fish taking up space. Now, if that's okay with you, that's okay with me. Gary Hempel, frogs croak all year. Well, I bet your bass breed all year. Tom Davis checking in from Ohio. Neil Pinkston, Zach Dombeck. Let's see here. My computer's slowing down. We got a lot of stuff going on. Let's see here. Ben Arnold, thoughts of stocking fathead minnows in a 2 acre pond in northeast Mississippi. The only reason you need to stock fathead minnows serve really 2 purposes. One is to promote the first year's growth of a newly stocked pond for largemouth bass fingerlings. The other is if you have a catfish only pond and you want a supplemental food. If you've got a pond that's been there for years and you got bass in it, fathead minnows are a waste of money. Don't do it. You're going to pay $10 a pound and you're going to spend $1,000 to gain 10 pounds of bass. So it would be smarter to go buy fish food, go buy a fish feeder from Texas Hunter. Texas Hunter is one of our partners. We love those guys. great feeders. Purina Mills manufactures Aquamax line of products. It would be smarter money rather than go buy fathead minnows, unless you're going to use them for chum or for a first year pond. It would be smarter to go buy a fish feeder and feed the fish and grow more bluegills. That would be a smarter way to do it. Dave Terry, thanks Bob. Love this show. Always learn something. Hey man, thanks. These guys ask some cool questions. They make a guy think about it. Drew Hay checking in from Pennsylvania. He must have got off the dozer a little bit early today. I bet Drew Hay's been practicing social distancing and shelter in place and a piece of heavy equipment. Share with us, Drew. What are you building nowadays? You got something going on. I know you do. Gary Hempel, I see 3 to 6 inch catfish look like blue cats when I feed. Okay, they could be. Now, blue cats aren't just going to show up in a pond. Now, unless that pond is next to the Rio Grande River and they're going to have spots on them. Or if it's next to Lake Tawakoni, they probably won't then either. But if somebody's got blue cats, they were put there. Freeman Sawyer, thanks for the entertainment info. Hey, man, I want to talk to you. I hope you'll be available in the next couple of days. I've got some stuff written up and we need to talk. We got the equipment back to map the lake, so I'm ready to set a date. Let's see, Ken Riley Tennyson. What apex predator should I add to a single acre pond with bluegill and perch? Pond is 15 feet deep, so hoping for a sustainable population. I'm going to presume that you are in the Midwest. And if you are, let's see, a single 1 acre pond with bluegill and perch. You know what? I think your apex predator now should be smallmouth bass. I think I'd stock some smallmouth bass. Buy some big ones. I'm not sure where you are, but if you're in western Missouri or Kansas, get them from Hartley Fish Farms. If not, find you a source from where you got your perch and bluegill. See if you can get some 6 to 8 inch smallmouth bass and stock those. Now, when you say apex predator, that's what makes me hesitate. A smallmouth bass in a perfect world is an apex predator, but not necessarily when you have yellow perch and you have bluegills. Yellow perch are going to get bigger. They're going to reproduce a lot at one time early in the year. Bluegill are going to overwhelm those smallmouth bass. So in the 3rd year or 4th year, a true apex predator in a 1 acre pond, you might want to put 3 or 4 tiger muskies in there if you see that your fish are getting crowded and not growing. So that's the answer I'm going to give you to that. Gary Hempel, next to Peach Creek. Okay. I'm going to do the best I can to not guess. Hey, Stan Lee, good to see you, buddy. Let's see, Ken's in Virginia. You know what? If you're in lowland Virginia, your apex predator is probably going to be largemouth bass with yellow perch and bluegills. But you know what? I'll tell you what I would do. Knowing that you're in Virginia, if you're at a higher elevation, focus on smallmouth. If you're in a lower elevation, largemouth bass is probably your best apex predator to control reproduction of yellow perch and bluegill and get good growth rates of yellow perch and bluegill. And I'd feed those two. Yellow perch, trained to feed well, so do bluegill. Feed them and let them grow. There's Rob Everett checking in. He's over there. He's got him a fishing store over there in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Good to see him. And Stan Lee, good to see you, buddy. Hope things are working good for you. Okay, guys, it's 7:08. Be sure to tell everybody to subscribe to Pond Boss Magazine. The economy of this magazine is what fuels our ability to do this. And with great sponsors like Purina Mills, Texas Hunter, Vertex Aeration Systems, Casco Marine, folks like that, Otterbein, good gosh, that's what can keep us going. But we need more subscribers. Of course, magazines, who wants one? You do. Talking to Ron last weekend over there in Louisiana, he keeps a stack of them because he sees them as a reference guide. And I can't tell you how many people do that. I hear that all the time. People keep their Pond Bosses because they want to go back and refer to them on down the road. So I'm $35 a year, $35 a year. Up until a couple of weeks ago, what I tell people, it's not true now, but the money you'd spend on a Friday night date, $40 to take your better half out to go out to eat, is gone in one day. This lives in your digestive system of your brain for an entire year. $35. But since we couldn't go out to eat, I guess I won't tell you that. But $35 a year, it's a bargain. Everybody says there's at least one or two nuggets in each issue. And I tell you, the nugget that I love in this issue, in the March-April issue, is Winnette Hargett's brownies. Oh my gosh, that's a recipe. I bet you those are the best brownies you'll ever put in your mouth. Not to mention all the good stuff. Let's see, Elmo Liner says, Jim Liner says he gets 7 magazines a month and Pond Boss is the best. Now let me tell you about Jim Liner. Jim Liner is one of those fishermen that carries a clicker around in his pocket, and every time he catches a fish, he clicks it. So at the end of the day, he can tell you that he caught 148 fish at the end of the day. He's one of the most avid anglers I've ever met. He's the biologist that takes care of Ray Scott's lakes that were sold a couple of years ago. He's the staff guy that takes care of all the groundwork that gets done, all the fertilization. He culls bass. He helps guests. You know, he works with water chemistry. When earlier on this broadcast, he said he was bringing in some tilapia. That's where they're going. So Jim Liner, if he says he likes Pond Boss, that is an ultimate compliment, and I deeply appreciate it. I hope that I don't know what the other magazines are, but I'm gonna leave that right there. Scott McClurg, have you tried the new Natural Lake Muck Pellets? No, I'm having a little bit of whiskey with Coke today. Don't tell my wife. I don't think she's watching right now. The Natural Lake Muck Pellets. I love Natural Lake, especially Landon Wyatt. Landon Wyatt is truly putting science behind the art of figuring out how microbes can benefit our waters. So Landon can take a sample of water or a sample of soil in your pond, analyze it, and then come up with a prescription for your body of water. And the Natural Lake muck pellets is a result of several years of research that he's done. So if you talk to him and he tells you they'll work, if he's analyzed your situation, you described it, and you've talked to Landon Wyatt and he says use these, he'll stand behind it. Dave Terry, buy it. Oh boy, I love that. Thanks, Dave. Let's see here. Ron Ardoin says, what's the biggest size adult bass to American Sportfish sells? Well, you know what? I'm going to dance a little bit here. They sell some really big fish. The big bass they sell, but they sell those to their better customers. If somebody spends $30,000 with them for some bluegills and small bass, they're going to get the 7, 8, 9, 10-pound bass that they have for sale. So it's not easy to say, yeah, they sell big fish, because they have a long waiting list of people that want the biggest fish. Now, they work with a couple of private pond managers in their neck of the woods in Alabama and Florida that oftentimes harvest a few big fish, and American Sportfish will get their hands on those. Now, the feed train bass, typically you can buy those from a pound to about 1.5 pounds, because the producers that raise them, they keep them for 2 years, then they want them to be gone, because by the time they hit their 3rd year, the value compared to the cost is beginning to decline, and they want to open that water up and grow more fish. So there you go. Let's see, we got something going down here. Drew Hay. Nice pond project going on. Emergency repairs with all the rain on old ponds as of late. A whole line of customers waiting on us. But with this virus, we're at a grind like everybody else. Glad we backed off Pondology. Yeah, we had the Pondology, Institute of Higher Pondology scheduled for tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday, but we postponed it, which everybody's postponed everything. I think we made a good choice. And as soon as this virus breaks and people start getting their legs back under them, we're going to do it again and reschedule it and set it up, and we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate getting out on the back side of this virus. I'm down with something, and I would have showed up today. Close one, yep. You know, oh boy, I'm glad you're down with something. Buddy, you better shelter in place. Keep in touch. Let's see. Sean McNulty, American Sportfish, is listening in. He liked that answer. So I guess what, if you want to buy $30,000 worth of bluegill and small bass or fingerling bass, that Sean might help you round up a few big fish. But other than that, probably not. Chris Horsley, I'm ready to start tagging my fish. Is there an inexpensive way to do it? Look up Floy Tags, Floy. It's like you can buy a little cheap gun like they used to put tags in clothes at Walmart. It's got a little needle in it, got a little tag sticking out. You stick it in the back of the fish, click it, push it in. You know, you've written down the number, weigh and measure. If you're going to tag fish, go to the trouble to write down the tag number, the length, and the weight, and the date. And then when you catch that fish again, you can weigh it, measure it, compare the date, go back and look at when you tagged it, and compare that fish. And which, I tell you what, as I'm thinking about that, why don't you look up Smartfish app. Wade Bales over in South Carolina, he's created the Smartfish app, which is very cool. When you're fishing and you weigh and measure a fish, you can plug it into your iPhone in that app, and it's going to grade that fish. And it's going to tell you immediately whether you need to cull it or not. Now, a lot of you guys can look at a fish and know if you need to cull it. But if you need some numbers and want to add some data to a collection to where you can go back and retrieve it later, look up Smartfish app. That's a real good one. Reagan Nash, is it normal for fish to be harder to catch when they are fed on a schedule? Let me think about that a minute. Not really, because when fish are fed on a schedule, I presume we're talking about bluegill, yellow perch, largemouth bass, and catfish. The best time to not catch them is when they're feeding, because they're conditioned for those seconds to be actively hitting the feed. Now, you can catch some of them while they're feeding, but when you do that, it's going to trigger the rest of the fish to turn off and go away. So I would not fish around the feeder when the feeder goes off. Now, if some of the fish are hanging around the feeder and you want to fish for them and catch some, there's nothing wrong with that. But typically what happens when you're feeding fish, they'll come a few minutes before the feeder goes off, a few seconds. The feeder goes off for 10 seconds. They eat for 30 seconds to a minute, then they're gone. You know, the other 24 hours and 23 hours and 59 minutes, they're out making a living just like everybody else is in the pond. So it's not normal for fish to be harder to catch when they are fed on a schedule. Now, what is normal is they're not going to be as likely to eat your bait if their tummies are full. Now, in warm water, it typically takes fish about anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to digest their feed, depending on what that feed is. You know, and so while their tummies are full for a little bit, some fish like a largemouth bass, it's their nature to be aggressive. I mean, I've caught a bass on a crankbait that had a 12-inch bass sticking out of its throat. That fish isn't hungry. It just was aggressive. It was reacting to a strike. So, is it normal for fish to be harder to catch when they're fed on? Not really. Not really, because there's going to be a lot of hours in the day when their tummies aren't full. And they will be hungry. So here we go. Ron says, I've got a customer wanting to pay whatever it takes to get the biggest feed train bass you have. I'll call you soon. Uh-oh, we got a little business going on here. Christopher Aguilar, how many bluegill will a 2-pound bass eat in a day? I'll tell you, it's a good general rule of thumb. Now, this rule of thumb is an average. Most fish are going to eat an average of 3% of their body weight every day. Now, for a bass, that doesn't qualify because a 2-pound bass can eat a 9-inch bass. And that 9-inch bass might weigh 10 ounces. So, how many bluegill will a 2-pound bass eat in a day? I'm going to tell you that it will eat as many as it can catch that it can stuff in his belly till his brain says that's enough. And it depends on how big the bluegill are. I've seen bass, I have actually cleaned bass that have had 15 or 18 3 to 4 inch bluegill in their belly, a 4-pound bass. So a 2-pound bass can eat 8 or 10 bluegills at a time. You know, and the only time it's going to do that is if they're all clustered in one spot. Mark Dyer, it's been too long. I'm back to listen. Darn work. Yeah, I know. Work gets in the way, man. Thank goodness we archive these things. Let's go back. You guys told me some more questions, but let's go back to Frank James a minute. Frank's concern is that he's kind of hung up on whether threadfin shad and tilapia compete, how they coexist. So what I'm going to emphasize is that here's the way I want to take this. Look at your lake as a group of niches. You've got a shoreline niche where small fish like to be. Then you've got a deeper water niche with structure and habitat where the bigger fish like to be. You've got an open water niche that's the top 4 feet of water over the deepest part of the water. That's a separate niche. You've got necks and coves that are separate niches. So when you're managing a lake for the different fish, what you're trying to do is take advantage of each of those niches. Now what we do is cross over niches with feeders. We can bring a fish out of its niche to come eat fish food, but then it's going to go right back to it. So as you're thinking about managing these fish, understand that the gizzard shad are going to live in the shallow, muddiest part of the pond because they're bottom feeders. Threadfin shad are going to live in the open water over the deeper water because they're filter feeders. Largemouth bass are going to be lingering in fairly shallow water with quick access to deep water, hoping they can ambush their prey. Bluegill are going to be living parallel to largemouth bass in typically shallower water and denser cover. That's their niche. Red-ear sunfish are going to be hanging out in the vegetation because they eat snails, and that's where the snails live. So if you can understand the habits of all those fish and see that they fit in a different niche, then you can understand how they can interrelate in a community. And that's why tilapia that typically make a living in shallow water aren't going to be in conflict with the threadfin shad. Now, I think the concern was, well, if we've got tilapia filtering food out of the water and we got threadfin shad filtering food out of the water, then we're going to run out of food. That's not how it works. You're going to have way, way more food in a fertile pond than what fish can eat, typically. All right, especially in small waters. Now, that may not be the case in a public reservoir where it's got billions of something. I know it happens in the Finger Lakes because there's certain fish up there, some shad-like fish, I can't think of the name of them, that feed primarily on zooplankton, so the blue-greens and the planktonic algae thrive. But here's where I'm going with this. Even if a threadfin shad school eats 10 pounds to gain a pound, think about the energy conversion. If it takes 10 pounds of plankton for a batch of shad to gain 1 pound, what happens to that other 9 pounds? A small fraction of that is lost to energy. But a bunch of it is converted back to the basic nutrients and reintroduced into the pond with fish waste. So it gets recycled back into the food chain. So it perpetuates itself again. So it's ongoing. Can they deplete it? Yeah. Will they eradicate it? No. If your plankton goes away, it's not because the fish ate it, it's because something else happened. All right, look at there. There's Shane McIntyre checking in. Good to see you, Shane. There's Matt Marsden with American Fish Tree. There's a shout out for Matt. Look up American Fish Tree, fish habitat. Chat Sepulvedo. How many feeders are recommended per surface acre in a feed train bass bluegill pond? I like to see 1 feeder for every 3 to 4 acres. So if you got a 10-acre lake, 3 feeders is what you need. If you got a 1-acre lake, 1. If you got a 3-acre pond, 1 feeder's plenty. And now, what you want to do is you want to see how the fish respond to that. Now, if you got a 3-acre pond and you're going to stock it heavy with feed train largemouth bass, you may want to put 2 feeders out there and put Aquamax 600 in 1 feeder just for the bass and MVP in another feeder in shallower water to entice bluegills. So there's a strategy behind that. But as a general rule, 1 feeder for every 3 to 5 acres. And the more intensely you want to manage, the more fish you want to grow, the more feeders per capita. So 1 feeder for 3 acres or a 10-acre lake, 2 or 3 feeders is plenty. Any point in fertilizing a pond with high water flow? Seems like it just all go out the spillway. No, you don't want to fertilize a pond with high water flow unless you have a siphon. If you've got a siphon drain where the water is being sucked off the bottom and overflowing through the pipe only, then it's safe to fertilize. When you've got water going over an emergency spillway, don't waste your money on fertilizer. Now, there are a very, very few exceptions. There's a lake we manage up in Oklahoma, Wildcat Springs Ranch. It's about a 70-acre lake. The spillway is way far off to the side. The creek that fills and floods the lake, fills it with water, flows parallel to the southern shore, so you can actually go over and fertilize the main body of that lake and be successful at it. Harrison Davis, just want to give a shout out to Mr. Lusk. Thank you for your advice on starting out in the business by working for a lake management company. You know what? Harrison emailed me some months ago, He said, hey, I'm thinking about getting into the pond management business, and I'm not sure how to start. What would you do? And I don't remember what I wrote, but my advice was work for somebody else and let them teach you and let yourself learn, gain some experience. And if you want to start business for yourself, go. That's what everybody seems to do anyway. You know, I don't think that the damn business in Texas would be like it was if there wasn't 4 or 5 of us training people for 30 years and they go out on their own. You know, but I do think Harrison working for another company, being loyal to them, grow with them, help them help you, you learn, be a great employee, and you're going to gain a lot. Because you're going to be confident in your ability to learn because you're not worried about mistakes. You know, we're all going to make mistakes. I still do, and it's irritating as hell. But you learn from it. So, Harrison Davis, a pat on the back to you, buddy. Chad Sepulveda, I do have a siphon. Okay, you know what, Chad? If you've got a siphon and the water's being sucked from 5 or 6 feet low or below the pond surface, I'd have no qualms fertilizing that pond. And I would do it, I would do it in the main body away from the siphon and get that water mixed, get that fertilizer mixed. It won't work unless you mix the fertilizer thoroughly into the water. Then it's going to work. Let's see here. Ron needs a new Texas Hunter feeder. What's their medium-sized feeder? I need to sell Chris Aguilar mine. I have one that's really cheap. Chris Aguilar, you guys are kindred spirits. I'm gonna tell you that. Ron Ardwan wants to speak with Harrison. Harrison, hunt down Ron. He wants to talk to you. And you need a new Texas Hunter. I think the middle of the road. All their feeders are good feeders. $850 is. I think the LM 175, which holds 100 pounds of feed. Holy cow, it's $726. Harrison Davis, we can arrange that. Look at that. I feel like Match.com here. We got Josie and Wayne watching this, sharing a mixed drink, watching it on their iPads, but texting each other back and forth. And we got Harrison, Ron, and Christopher. Chris Aguilar, you guys are hanging out. That's great. I love it. All right, guys. Holy cow. Ron, I'm kind of pissed off that this video didn't cut in half at 7 o'clock. I have no idea why it did it to us. I want to tell everybody we had a great show last week with Ron Ardwan over there outside Lake Charles, Louisiana. And that video is now up on YouTube. You can link to it from the Pond Boss website. There's 2 pieces. Leanne put part 1 and part 2. It's a really entertaining show. Ron's a great guy. He did a great job. And you guys need to check that out and see what he got going. Okay, here we go. Yep, Drew Hayes sells those feeders. Let's see. Josie wants to know what to do for your husband. Honey, if I have to tell you that, you already know. He needs an electrofishing survey. That's what he needs. You know what? Let's talk. You and I talk here in a couple of days because we need to set things up when Wayne's going to be in town. You know, all this coronavirus stuff has really kind of kept us in a little bit of an uproar. But we do need to go check out your lake and see what you guys have in it. So that's the next thing we need to do for your husband and you is go figure out your fishery so we can get you. Yeah, Christopher Aguilar, and you didn't call me. No, I didn't. I was sheltering in place in my truck. All right. Yep. Ron says that he bets his feeder one of his. Yes, it did. All right, folks. I'm going to cut out of here. Remember, spread the good news. Pond Boss, $35 a year. Share this video to your timeline. Click like. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. You're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a coffee mug. We ran out of the mugs that keep hot things hot and cold things cold. So listen, I've kind of run out of gas here, and I don't know what else we're going to talk about, so I'm going to wrap it up. Look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday. I really appreciate you hanging me out. Appreciate you hanging out with me on this Wednesday. So until next Wednesday, see you later. Adios.